was Tom Hanks. And I had an existential crisis about whether or not, like, is there any way to get to know Tom Hanks? I didn't have one question. We were just kind of running down the clock. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know if this is a valid way. Like, you tell me, tell me what you think I should know, because I don't even know what this is anymore. That's what it became to me. It became like interviewing after this book tour became like when you stare at a word too long and it becomes just a string of letters. Like, what am I doing here? What am I like? Is there any way to get to know somebody? I don't know. I still don't know the answer. I mean, you know, I told you my mom and Aunt Lois are here. Maybe after they'll tell me whether or not that was the authentic version of me. I have no idea. And it, as you can see, it's plunged me into a space of, I don't know what the hell I'm doing anymore.
Which is the space I would say 9 out of 10 people live in. So there you go. You're just, I mean, I think you
because you got me there.
I really do think it's possible to get to know somebody because, I don't know, my husband always says, don't call what you do interviewing because you just want to chat with somebody. Can you get to know someone if you chat with them for 30 minutes at a cocktail party? I would argue yes. You don't know? You don't know?
I don't know. I'm so self-conscious at a cocktail party.
Okay, maybe not a cocktail party. How about you're sitting next to them at a dinner and it's just, you have to have a conversation, right? You could get to know someone a little.
Or you get to know the most ideal version of them. Like, if my husband overheard this, I don't know what he's thinking. Maybe he's thinking, wow, she doesn't sound like half the monster she normally is. Or maybe he's thinking she's shyer than this in real life. He's not thinking that. Or maybe he's thinking like that what I'm saying is a facade I put on. I don't know. We are in the soup. Zibby. We are.
I feel terrible. I hope that other people are interested in this. This is the stuff I find fascinating, but it's not my typical. No, I love it. Are you kidding? I feel like now our husbands have to come in and say, is this really what these two women are like? Or are they,
maybe.
I feel like, I don't know. Okay, well, let's get back to your book. Okay, so now we know what inspired you to write the book and all of that. What was your process like writing? How long did it take you to write? Where do you like to write? Give me like the process stuff. Please.
The where do you like to write is what I call like a man question. Like all of the male writers I know have a place where they could write. And I can tell you this, I wrote my book on an airplane with my child straddling me and crying, not being able to see the keys. I wrote my book in the how like some Nordstroms have a couch in the bathroom. I wrote a big chunk of it there. I wrote it at the bakery in town. I wrote it in the car outside of a McDonald's because McDonald's have good Wi-Fi. And if you sit there, I wrote it especially in the 90-minute period where you drop kids off at a birthday party and don't have to pick them up yet. I have a lot of friends here who used to think I was a very generous carpooler because I would do both ways because of that. And now I don't. So I think they wonder exactly what happened to me. But because of that, and because I didn't need a special place and I didn't need the wind blowing through my hair in a certain way, because I've never been given those things. I think that those people the more needs you have, the more it will take you 1,000,000 years to write your book. I wrote this in 6 months, and I wrote it because it was a challenge to myself. I was a freelance writer at the time. I was on contract at GQ in the New York Times Magazine, but that's not a steady income. And I wrote it as a challenge to myself, which was you have 6 months to try to do something that will get you ahead financially. I'm literally the only person in the history of the world that wrote a novel to make money which is not a statement on delusion, but a statement on how little you make as a journalist. The idea is always like, how can I continue to do this? And this is, how can I make sure I never miss a basketball game? My children have 600 basketball games a week, and I only have 2 children. How can I ever make it so that I don't miss something that's important to me, that I'm home as much as I can be for bedtime? How can I make it so that I don't have to get dressed all the time when I commute? I see all these people, like, we're all wearing pants and we're all wearing bras and we're all wearing, like, our hair is done, and it just feels like it couldn't possibly be that that's how we're supposed to conduct ourselves. Like, if there's one thing that happens after this time, I hope we do away with the idea of like restrictive clothing. My husband has always said to me that he can't believe that we're already in 2020 and we're not all wearing like speed skating unitards. And I'm on board with that. That's how I did it. I did it on airplanes. I did it in between. I did it while the kids were setting the table. I would add a sentence. I would add a page. And then when it looked like I was making it to the finish line, that's when I would say to my husband, take the kids to your mother in Florida for the weekend. Maybe they won't notice I'm there. Or I would volunteer to do stories. I went to interview Antonio Banderas in Budapest.
Nice. I caught that.
Because of the ride, because it would take like 12 hours to get there because there were no direct flights, and an airplane time is really good time. So that's how I wrote the book.
Wow. The writing I've done, I'm the same way with you. And I'm not like you, but I feel like when you have kids and your life is so full and there's no free time, you have to grab the time also to use that time to read. I mean, those are also the moments, the stolen moments where you can get anything literary in any way shoved in.
I don't know how you do it.
So
I don't know how you read and then interview people. Because I can't read as quick. I guess I can't read as quickly as you do.
I read quickly. I've also figured out sort of how to skim a lot and research authors, and I don't read every single book start to finish, every single page. I try to do that more for the podcast. For the podcast, I really do try to, but like the Instagram lives I'm doing now, there's just no way.
There's no way, right?
But I say to them like, hey, I'm sorry I haven't read your book, but it sounds great. I feel like for me at least, and I don't know about you, but this whole pandemic has allowed me to deal with my perfectionism a little bit, to say like, okay, well, no one is expecting anything of me anymore. Like if you say I haven't read your book, people are like, of course you haven't. How could you? And I'm like, this is great.
Yes, I absolutely feel that way. My husband is doing a majority of the homeschooling, but I find that the accrued centuries of sexism have allowed people to assume that I'm doing it. So they are really forgiving of me. They're very understanding because it must be so hard for me right now. Whereas I'm not even sure if my kids they're in the next room at school. I don't even know what platform they do it for. Like, are they on Google Meet? Are they on Zoom? Am I okay? I don't know. So I feel like people let me off the hook more, which only makes me more of an ambition monster.
Oh, I like it.
Maybe I'll be able to write a second book and a third book during this time. The thing that I'm finding is horrible about this pandemic, in addition to the pandemic, right? Like, obviously, yes, the pandemic is the bad part, but the amount of ways I have to kind of keep it together for my family and not freak out. It's coming out in my sleep. It's coming out like I wake up at 2 a.m. every day now for an hour, just for an hour. Like I'm trying to build some acceptance around it and just be up for that hour and be okay with it. But it's so disturbing. But then I wake up and then I'm like, I can't figure out how to attack my perfectionism. But I also think that I don't have perfectionism. Like I have enough experience with the fact that a good story can be made great by collaboration. So by the time I've written an okay story, I know from experience by now that sending it to my editors is going to make it great. So I make it as good as I can, but I know that it's not just in my hands. There's nothing I do that is left to me alone, although everything I do has my name on it. So I feel very lucky about that. That's what I'll say about perfectionism. I wish I had some more perfectionism. I have the part of perfectionism that is self-loathing, but I don't have the part of perfectionism that is execution.
Interesting. No, I'm not saying I do anything perfectly. I just aspire to that. It's like a wannabe perfectionist or something. It's like, if I could be perfect, that's what I would like to be, but I'm failing. And by the way, I don't even try to pretend in front of my kids anymore. I've cried I've cried more in front of my kids during the past 2 months than I have in all the years combined. And that includes going through a divorce and all the other stuff I've been through in life. And so I feel like I can sleep through the night because I am a mess during the day a lot of the time. So I don't know. However we get through it, it's like
it's good. Like an alternative. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the latest with Inflation is in Trouble becoming a movie or a TV show? Or I know you had really exciting news. So what's the latest?
Television show. Yeah. So it is being developed by ABC Signature for FX. And I have these two amazing producers, Sarah Timberman and Susanna Grant. When I went to film school, and when I was trying, my first attempt was as a screenwriter. I worshipped Susanna Grant. She wrote Erin Brockovich, and she was one of the only women who was notably doing that. And I just kind of glommed onto her. And they wanted the book. And so I feel like I'm writing episodes, and I have like a world-class producer and a world-class screenwriter, two women who are just excellent at this. Also, I've never worked for women before, other than my time at a startup. I've never worked in a creative model for a woman. I've had a couple of female editors, but not ones that I worked for on contract. It's like there's so much less aggression, and there's so much less, whatever this is. I love my editors very, very much, but it's a very calm experience to work for these two women. So obviously right now, there have been some ideas that people throw at me, like, what if we were to sequester a bunch of actors and then allow them to shoot this television show even now? But it doesn't really work out that way, since if you've read the book, Toby has quite a few montages of sexual interaction that last in a screenplay last less than 7 seconds, and you don't want to do that to an actress. Just keep her in hiding, keep her in a tower, just so for 7 seconds. But it's going very, very well, and it's really exciting to think of this living on. I don't know. I think that there's so much opportunity to have to watch these characters live and to tell a definitive story about middle age right now. I mean, that's the thing that kind of set me on fire about the project in the first place. Even if there is all this other more glamorous stuff, there's the sex, there's the dating, there's the wealth, and I'm obsessed with wealth. But it's the middle-agedness is the thing that I'm still working my way through.
I have a hard time self-identifying as middle-aged. Do you have trouble with that, or you're embracing it?
No, I have been since I was 35. I have been self-identifying as middle-aged. And when I was 25, I was like, well, I guess I screwed screwed life up. Like I've always thought that I'm much older, and that's a real curse. Like, you're very lucky, because it's a curse to think of yourself as always old, because in 5 years, I'm going to realize I was not at all old right now. And what did I do at the time? I wore a Land's End bathing suit and a caftan because I thought I had to live in hiding my whole life, when really this was my youth. Or at the very least, right this minute was as young as I was ever going to be again. It's a really hard thing to think about. Yourself in time. Also, you're only middle-aged if you live to old age. Like, we're in a pandemic. These might be my senior years. We don't know yet.
These are my golden hours, and I just don't even know. This is it. The end of the line. I mean, I shouldn't even joke. This is horrible. I mean, I
didn't hear that as a joke. I heard that as a frenetic.
It could be.
What else? How could it be that you and I, when we arranged to do this, we arranged to do it live? I negotiated a car into Manhattan, which I thought was the height of glamour. And now we're doing it this way. It is unbelievable. I wake up and I cannot believe that this is what's going on in the world. Maybe I can't believe it also because my life right now is so similar to what my life is every other day. I keep thinking it would feel more like reality if I had a true disruption in my life. But even when I write stories for the Times, I stay home and I write them.
But not everybody is necessarily home with you, right? I mean, your kids are like at school. But
the day is short and they get home pretty fast.
I know, it's true. Yeah, that's true.
Hence the Nordstrom bathroom. What's missing from my life is the Nordstrom bathroom at the Short Hills Mall.
The department stores cannot go out of business, or else novels will cease to exist. What will we do?
Mine will.
Fleischman will be in more than trouble. Fleischman will disappear.
Fleischman will be in the bargain bin.
Yes. So I just have to ask, since this is a Temple Emanu-El Streicker Center function and everything, the role of Judaism in this book in particular, how did that play a role, and how does religion fit into your life? Are you particularly religious, or I don't know, maybe I'm not allowed to ask that. Can I ask that?
No, you're not allowed to ask that. That's a very hairy question. I was raised in a very Orthodox household. I went to yeshiva. I went to Yeshiva University High School for Girls. I say yeshiva to this crowd and they say, "Oh, Ramaz," and I'm here to reassure you that I could not have gotten into Ramaz. I left it. Like, my mother became religious when I was 12. She was very supportive, disappointed but supportive in the fact that I have three sisters, and they all are religious, and I just couldn't do it. And we work as a family very hard now to accommodate each other. And it is one of the things I'm proudest of, that we have not let the variance in our observances become an issue for us. I have Friday night dinner. My kids don't use screens on Shabbat. My kids go to day school. I pay membership at a synagogue that I attend sometimes, and that I enjoy when I attend. I am planning a bar mitzvah, and that is the last time I kind of had a crisis around this was when I planned my wedding. Now I plan this bar mitzvah, and I'm trying to think about how do I want it to be, and it always forces me to ask these questions, which are, how do you want to be? Which leads to me saying, how are you 44 years old and you don't know yet? Like, when are you going to figure this out? But when I wrote the book, I did not think of it as a Jewish book. I thought of it as a book about my world, about the kinds of people that I've known. Like, they say, write what you know. And I always rebelled against that, because when I hear that, I think of it as the same thing as people saying, stay in your lane in journalism. You should only be able to write about people who are like you. but, you know, some of the best stories I've done, like I wrote about Don Lemon, who is a gay Black man. I wrote about, I've written about Gentiles. I've written about all kinds of people who aren't like me. And I really am against the idea that we can only write about the people who are like us. But the thing that writing about people like you is it gives you specificity. It gives you, it's a way to speak without having an accent, right? Like I know, it's my first time out. I'm going to write a book. You know what? It's going to be about the people I know. Another aspect of it is that you asked me where I wrote a lot of this book, and the one place I didn't mention, which is crazy because it's where I practically revised the whole thing, but wrote a big chunk of it, was my Aunt Lois, whom I've said is in the audience here, owns the studio next to her apartment, maybe to one day turn into a palace that, you know, I can only hope I will still have access to. But it's where I've gone, and the Upper East Sidiness of this book comes from the fact that I spent days sequestered in her and my Uncle Alan's place, going out to get food, standing in line at the salad place on 3rd Avenue and 85th Street, and noticing how on the Upper East Side, it seems like people are exercising all the time. Like there is no peak period of exercise. Women exercise. Like if I wanted to leave writing, the thing I would do is open up an exercise business on the Upper East Side, because people will exercise as much as it's like the water will fill the tank. Like there's more exercise to be done. And I would watch these women wearing these amazing tank tops that said like lipstick and lunges and eat in and live, love, laugh. And, you know, but first coffee, and all of those things came from seeing them. And all of the Jewish aspects of my book didn't feel like Jewish aspects to me. I am like a post-Philip Roth fiction writer. They felt like a specific American experience to me. So that's how I'll say that. I do know that like I didn't think of it as a Jewish book until I named it. It had a few names, and then I settled on Fleischman is in Trouble. And I was warned by several interested parties that might not sell well in the UK, right? For example. And I'd say, why? And they'd say, because it's too New Yorky. And I'd say, are you sure you're using the right word? Because everyone was very proud of the, you know, like everyone loved the cover, right? Which is an upside down New York cityscape. That's when I found out that it was a Jewish book. And then when I toured, and three things happened. Number one, synagogues were interested in me. Number two, I met a bunch of people named Toby Fleischman. And I had a bunch of people who brought me pictures of their late grandmother or great uncle named Toby Fleischman. And it was remarkable. And young people too. And the third thing that happened was that people asked me this question. And I guess the answer is, maybe I'm too Jewish to see outside of being Jewish. I don't know. That's my answer.
That's a great answer. And by the way, I have grown up on the Upper East Side, and until the pandemic have been there basically most of my life. And I do not work out like that at all. So it's not everybody, but I do see it.
I'm in New Jersey, and pre-pandemic, if I want to exercise, there is a 2-hour period of time that follows school drop-off.
Same for me.
Do whatever you need. When I was staying at Aunt Lois and Uncle Alan's apartment, I could exercise at 11 p.m. however I wanted to on a Saturday night. It was amazing. I didn't, but I could have.
I know. I always like when I'm like driving home from like a dinner or something and I see somebody like in a building on their treadmill and I'm like, wow, they're still working out, right? It's like, anyway.
It's amazing.
What were your alternate titles? Can I ask?
Yeah. The first one was called Schrodinger's Marriage. And everybody said to me, half the people said, you can't put an umlaut in your first novel title because you already have such a screwy name. Nobody will know how to search for it. The other half said, great title, but then a week later couldn't remember it. So that's where I took my guidance. The second title was In What Universe? Because I love the audacity of it. But then I found out that there was a YA novel called In What Universe? And I felt like that's a really good YA novel title. I don't think that's a good, like, the thing I'm doing is a little darker than that. And my friend Elizabeth Weil, who's also a writer, she was at the New York Times Magazine at the time with me, but now she's at ProPublica. She came up with the title, Fleischman is in Trouble. And I kept trying to think of other good titles. And I couldn't think of anything else. And now I'm so happy that we went with this one. And also it's done pretty well in the UK. And also it is sold, it's foreign rights have sold in a kind of order of anti-Semitic, like Poland, Hungary, Croatia, Germany, like those were France. Those are the first places to go. So
I want to make sure we have time for all the questions, but I just want to ask what your next project is and then see if you have any advice for aspiring authors.
Okay.
So what are you working on? What's your next project?
My next project, other than the television show, is a new book that will be out next summer called Long Island Compromise. It's about a family from Great Neck and inherited trauma and inherited wealth. And the way Fleischman was ultimately about middle age and gender and relationships, which are all kind of one thing, if you follow it down the hole. This is about the disappearing middle class. And this is about wealth among wealth in the suburbs, wealth among Jews, and the way it's really, really hard to get ahead now. In a way that it wasn't for my parents' generation. And my advice for aspiring writers is, it depends. It's you know what it is? It's, and in no way to despair, it's a good question, to not ask anybody's advice and to not listen to anybody's advice. I think that every time you ask for an opinion from someone that you admire, for example, you take that to be the absolute truth when it's entirely possible that you are going to be better than the people that you admire. And asking advice of writers, reading writer blogs, which I've done, listening to writer podcasts, is an excellent way to convince yourself that you are writing when actually you are not writing. You are doing the opposite. You are taking in information that will make writing impossible. The more information you have, the harder it is, I think. Again, that's me as a patented terrible student. But I think that if you ask people too many questions and you start listening too much, the only way to be a writer is to write. The only person who can call themselves a writer is someone who has written today. There is no amount of doing anything other than writing that will leave you with a page full of writing. And 100% of unwritten novels don't get sold, whereas you stand a chance. So just write. Do not believe in writer's block. It was invented by people who want you to feel bad. You can always write the next sentence and just go. And I can't wait to read whatever you have to write. There are so many people who are saying that right now is a bad time to write. And there's so many people who are doing this thing where they're making it so that you feel bad about writing, or that you're thinking it's impossible. I see it on Twitter all day. Nobody will be able to produce good art right now. You know what? Some days are bad and some days are good. You can still do it. Don't let anyone tell you that. And so now, for someone who had no advice, that was my advice.
But you have to put an asterisk and say that it's okay if people listen to my podcast to inspire them.
Yours isn't a how-to podcast. Yours is a great reader podcast. That's why I listen to it, or else I couldn't listen to it, because I cannot listen to that.
Okay, good. Just making sure you didn't rule me out there.
No.
Zibby and Kathy, we have gotten so many fabulous questions during this last 45 minutes. So first of all, we have about 6 different questions on why did you make Toby, as a short male, these keep coming in, why did you make Toby 5'5"? We'll start with that.
That's a great question. The reason I made Toby 5'5" is because it felt to me that there are a lot of metaphors throughout the novel, as there always should be. But the thing about him is that he had this thing that when he was dating before, was insurmountable to his being considered an attractive man. And I needed him to figure out, to see himself new in this period of time, that the thing that he thought was insurmountable was now a non-issue. And that was very, very important to me.
Okay, so somebody would like you to know that they went to Ramaz, and as did her 2 children, and you have surpassed all 3 of them. That's the
But I do not understand basic principles of biology, and I have a 4th grader in the other room, and I haven't been able to help him with math in 2 years. But thank you, I appreciate it.
So let's see, this person, anonymous. Can you talk about the device of starting the book narrated by Libby, although we don't know that until later? Also, did the device of frequent switching of narrators evolve as you wrote, or was that planned?
That's a great question. So the first draft was written in the 3rd person. The only thing that mattered to me was that at the end of the book, you would be able to know that you were holding in your hands a book that one of the characters had written, the Libby character. And no one I gave it to understood that. So I felt like, okay, it's only once or twice where you could say that person's not a good reader before you have to realize. So I went back and I made the entire thing first person. And I account for it by the fact, first of all, the reason for it, which was that she is someone who is used to telling men's stories and does not feel like women have the right to have their stories told. And that's the evolution of the Libby character. Everyone has an evolution, except maybe poor Seth. Maybe he will after he gets married. He'll have a good arc. But in the end, Libby was a good the whole point of the book is that it be narrated by Libby so that you could see that there are all these different versions of a story. When my friends started getting divorced, the thing I noticed, and again, that's my job to just observe, is that the men, and there were so many of them, like right when I turned 40, to the point where I knew that if I hadn't heard from someone in a while, it was that they were getting divorced. The men would always say, my wife, she was always so angry at me. And the women would say, I was so angry all the time, and my husband never asked me why. So I thought about that and the changing nature of empathy as a story unfolds. And I'm always interested in that as someone who writes profiles. I sit and I listen to all of these mostly men tell me about their lives and their ex-marriages and their mothers. And I wonder what those women would say if I were speaking to them.
Well, on another topic, Melanie has a very good question. Why do you have an old-fashioned ending with Rachel returning to her family? Did Rachel and Toby learn anything about themselves during the separation that will make them more woke?
I do not think I'm someone who should explain an ending, but I will say that you might be starting with a basic incorrect premise. I would ask you to reread the last 10 pages and ask yourself if that last scene ever happened. That's what I would say.
Right.
And that's more than I've ever said to anyone. I'm drunk on the solitude here.
I have a very interesting question from a Lois. You might know the name. Kathy has great respect for therapy and its process. In the case of Toby and Rachel or anyone, what is her belief about people's ability to change?
So Lois and I have, Aunt Lois, thank you, Aunt Lois. This is what I believe. I don't believe that people change. And this is devastating to Lois, who's a therapist and a great one if you need one and in the area. What I would say is that I don't think people change. I think we come to, the great thing that happens to us is that we come to terms with who we are and how we can be forgiving of who we are. My therapist, I don't know if the end point for me is change, if that's my therapist's goal for me, but a lot of therapy is around, my therapy is around basic acceptance of the circumstances, basic acceptance of who I am. A thing I struggle with is how badly I want to live in Manhattan when I live in New Jersey now. I live there because my husband got a job here. He worked at the Star Ledger here for 5 years, covering the governor. And I will look around right now at this totally pleasant place. And a thing that goes through my head all the time is, why can't I be someone who finds this pleasant? Why does this feel like the end of the world to me? Why do I feel like I'm dying a slow death here every day? And my therapist would say, like, maybe you are. Like, maybe you just know that you don't want to live there. And so am I going to change? Am I going to become someone who likes this place? It's not looking great. Maybe I could just be someone who accepts that I want to live somewhere else.
Well, Susan has a very good question, and it's basically, can women ever be happy?
Not in this world. Like, I really do believe, I think your only shot at being a happy woman is if you could shut off the way that the world was built for and by men, and if you let that not drive you crazy. And I haven't found a way to do that. And I also, and here will blow Lois's mind, even though I know this is no longer her question, I don't even know if happiness is the goal. I think like meaning and productivity and people you like might be the goal. But happiness, happiness was not something that I've ever considered to be a goal, only because it's an emotion. And I would hate to think that I'm pinning my hopes on something as fleeting as an emotion. My goal is like low blood pressure. My goal is, to live where I want to live. And those things will make my life easier and better, but that's not the same thing as happiness. I'm sorry, I'm a downer.
No, you're not. Let's see. Karen said, I love the book so much. I found Libby's ultimate take on middle age to be a little depressing. Was that your intention, or did you find her character to be helpful?
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry. I'll tell you this. Sometimes at a normal reading where you go and see people and put on, I'm not wearing real pants. I'm wearing leggings and a nice shirt. But usually I read something from the book. And when I do, this is the feeling I have. I think, oh my God, you poor thing. You must have been really miserable when you were writing this. And I think that like I was working through something and I no longer am working through it. And one of the ways to work through it is to write it down for a lot of people to read it and to tell you that that it meant something to them, it helps mitigate some issues for you. But at the time, I was adjusting to what it meant to be over 40. I was adjusting to what it meant to feel fairly settled. And I feel better now. I feel like, remember that movie, The Ring? Like they watch a videotape and then they die in 7 days. I feel like I took my sadness and I put it in there and I gave it to a lot of people. And I'm sorry for that. But I also think that that's Libby's feelings on middle age are how she felt then. And that's what moves people to create a strong feeling.
Well, right. The very first question we had was interesting. Dorothy, she said, I thought a major point of the book was the difference between the female voice and the male voice in popular literature and the greater respect for the male voice as being more complex and interesting. Do you agree? Do you think that comes across in your book or not?
I hope it does. Thank you. What a great observation. A thing I've noticed in being someone who writes about people is that when I write about men, they are able to plumb the depths of their souls when they talk to me. Whereas the women are so traumatized from having to become people who would even be interviewed in the first place, that the only thing they could talk about are the obstacles that it took for them to be people who could plumb the depths of their souls. I, as someone who has spent so many hours in a room with men asking questions, not looking at my phone because that's my job, I can say this, that men and women are remarkably the same, but men have never had to justify their feelings or their behavior. Not all men, not all women, right? But most. And I feel like that's what informs an entitlement to a voice. Toby is allowed to suffer. Libby has to constantly ask herself if she is allowed to suffer. That's what I think. I won't mention Rachel here.
Well, about Rachel, we have a question from someone named Allie, who I know. And she said, what inspired you to make Rachel a theater agent? This person is a theater agent, and she thinks you captured that world perfectly.
Thank you. I'm so happy to hear that. I wanted her to have something that was New York based, where she would also maybe want to move to California. And I think it was like around, I had just written about at the time, the guy who was the new Hamilton, and it was on my mind. And also I love theater. And also I thought it was an interesting thing to take somebody, like the idea of creating a star or having some ambition. There was some thinking that she could be a TV agent or a film agent. Also, my husband used to work at Variety, and we talk about agents a lot. I have an agent that I love, and I'm always interested in this life where I dread negotiation, of someone like going into the negotiation arts. So I'm very happy to hear it. Also, when I was writing it, I was, I'm at the New York Times. I go to a lot of theater. I do a lot of theater stories, and I always wanted to kind of be in the theater. So I am hoping that I can take the musical that's inside the book and turn it into maybe a full episode of the television show. I'm saying that out loud here so that it can happen. In order, I've told all these people in Manhattan that I'm going to do it, so I should do it. But really, I've always been looking for an excuse to write a musical.
Well, full disclosure, that question was from my daughter, actually.
Oh, good. Where's she an agent?
She's an agent at CAA, and she's listening to the podcast and sent me that question.
Oh, hello.
That's good. So, next question from Anonymous. Wondering how much of your Orthodox background influences how you and you view and interact with your characters.
I don't know if any. I feel the straight. I was born into a household that was unaffiliated, raised by a secular Israeli who had never been into a shul until her wedding day, who then became Hasidic. And then I met a man who had an Orthodox conversion. And now I'm at a conservative shul. I feel like I was born to be all the Jews. I'm like a biblical character who is supposed to experience all of it so I could tell the world about it. Which is not as egocentric as it sounds. It's really just me trying to make sense of how this happened to me. A big struggle I've had in my life is the question, what would I be how would I view religion if it hadn't been such a prominent part of my upbringing? And I can promise you, especially as I plan my son's bar mitzvah, hell if I know. I am hoping maybe I'll eventually know, but maybe it's one of those unanswerable questions. My Orthodox upbringing, though, is the thing that sent me to Israel for a gap year, which was a very influential part of my life and the way I think about things and the friends that I have, right? Like, I have not assimilated away from having a majority of friends that I grew up with. In fact, my husband and I were writing our will, and we were we don't want our children, should the worst happen to us, God forbid, to have we want them to continue with the education they have. And we were like, who do we leave them to? At some point, we forgot to make friends who weren't Orthodox, who we're very close with. So it follows me around, and I don't know, but maybe it's why I wrote what is called a Jewish book. And maybe it's why I wrote a Jewish book that I didn't even think of as a Jewish book when I wrote it. I don't know.
Carol has a great question. It's about the character of the woman. She doesn't remember her name. The woman who was sick with liver disease, and they didn't actually look. Thank you. And they didn't actually look in her eyes. Does that mean people do not look at women? That is her. Very good question.
Thank you. That is my hopefully on the nose metaphor. Right. Like in the first part of the book, that we are introduced to someone whose total ruin and ultimate fate could have been prevented had anyone bothered looking at her, right? Yeah. And there's a certain point where we just start looking at women for their parts. When they're young, it's for their reproductive parts, and as we get older, it's for the hands that drive them to basketball practice, and the body that wears an apron that cooks food. So yes, thank you for noticing that.
Let's find another one. I had a gushing question right here. Somebody Carrie wrote a gushing question. How does Taffy manage to imbue her subjects in Fleischman from such a compassionate or an empathetic perspective that makes reading about them, from Rachel to the Persian woman that Fleischman meets through Tinder, so wonderful? And I think you're possibly the best writer in America right now.
Well, thank you. If that's my mother or my agent.
Yep, Carrie.
I appreciate that. That's very. I can't tell you how much that means to me, and how all parts of me immediately reject that. But I don't know. I guess this is just how I write. I think the goal of all writing is empathy. Right? I think that especially I've been forced to think about this, not so much in novel writing, but in the fact that I write, the majority of what I write is celebrity profiles. And one of the work I think a celebrity profile should do is enlighten people and make it so that they, that we feel less alone. That's the only thing that art, including a celebrity profile, to me I'm interested in. I read a lot of celebrity profiles, and I find that a lot of them are mean, or that they take pot shots. And I find that it's very sad to me, the idea that you would read something and laugh for a second, because then you would feel bad about that laughter. And actually, I think that this is one of the ways that I think there was another question about this. Like, this is, I don't know if it's orthodoxy, but it's certainly where one of my Jewish values comes in, which is that I want to put good into the world. I want to take this thing that is normally a throwaway, like mean, snarky thing, and I want to find a way to be funny without being mean. And I want to find a way of informing without being without leaving the bounds of decency. Like my goal in journalism is decency. And if someone I write about finds that I was indecent, I go through a spiral. It has not happened more than once or twice, and for different reasons that I don't even necessarily agree with. But my goal is to put decency into the world. And I think decency always begins with empathy. And I think that anytime you tell someone's story from their point of view, you are creating empathy.
Nice. One or two final questions. Somebody named Nancy wrote, reviewers really didn't mention Rachel's upward mobility, her fancy house in the Hamptons, asking Toby to take a job for $1 million that he wouldn't have enjoyed. They didn't speak much about that. Can you comment on that?
I don't understand reviewing very well, except to say that I think that comes, like, those revelations, maybe they didn't know what to do with them. Maybe everyone who read this book, some people will swear it's an online dating book. Some people will swear it's a divorce book. Some people will swear it's a book about women's ambition. I guess whatever it is that they saw is what they wrote about. Some people just think some people in my family just think it's a dirty book. I can't tell you because I have no idea. And also, I only skimmed reviews, which I did not know I'd be the kind of person who did that. But I skimmed reviews. I read each of them once, and I tried not to take them in, because if they're bad, how do you write another book? And if they're good, how do you write another book? By the time this book was reviewed, I had already sold my second book, and I have to write it.
Right, absolutely. Of course, about 7 people asked, who do you envision playing these characters?
I love this question, and I'm no longer allowed to answer it. And here's why. It's very good reason. Because if I say one short Jewish guy, then what happens if we end up with another short Jewish guy? And he knows forever that that was my first choice. I can say that the options right now are amazing, and that I cannot wait to see it. I didn't picture anybody when I was writing this, which is a bad thing, because one of the big revisions that my editors had was to go back and to put more physical specificity in, and to give people kind of more characteristics. I guess that is the only thing I can say is, like, I can't wait to see who this is, and I hope it's not crazy. I will say this, that a long time ago, I did a story about the making of The Leftovers for HBO, a book I loved. And Tom Perrotta was in the writer's room, and I said to him, did you picture your main character as Justin Theroux? And he said, I learned a long time ago that other people are better at this than I am, and I will take it.
Great. Well, the name of the series we called Women on the Move, all the choices women make. Now how do you see all these characters in 5 years? Where do you see Rachel?
Where do I see Rachel? You know what? I'm going to ask for a different question, because I find that it ruins the experience for people when I say things like that, because I've already, like, I have found that people become so offended when I tell them that something is different. My intentions were different from what Like, the book isn't mine anymore. Like, anyone who bought it, it's theirs now. So I will back off from that question, and maybe you'll see.
All right, let me see if I can have one more good ending question for you. Well, we have a few.
I'll say before at the bottom of it, someone said, does the actor have to be Jewish? No, although I don't know that there's any kind of problem with taking an oppressed minority and trying to give them work, even though we try not to think of Jews that way for survival's sake. But no, it's whoever fits the bill. But, I don't know. Go on.
Wow. Well, I'm looking for a good ending question. Well, as you can read the questions as well, and you can see how positive they are.
Flash. I would only lightly distracted by them.
Here's a nice question. A little more about Toby. Is he typical of his generation?
Yes.
And a man growing up in his age group?
Yes. So Toby, I think, represents all the ways that a man, like a kind of forward-thinking, liberal kind of guy, can think of himself as a feminist. And the book actually is designed to capture the gap between who he thinks he is and who he actually is. Since we're at this crazy intersection in gender relations right now, where you have my generation, girls raised in the 70s and 80s, who were told that they could do anything that they wanted, who believed that they could do anything that they wanted, went and did everything they wanted, and the men, no one prepared them for what that would look like. No one prepared anyone for the question of, well, then who's driving the kids to art class? Nobody, we grew up with this archetypal woman holding a martini when a man walks through the door. And now that they're both walking through the door, who's holding the martini? And is a man this age cursed to the memories of the freedoms his father had?
Interesting.
When his freedoms are entirely different, and maybe there is no martini anymore. Just nobody told the men.
It's a very, very good ending. Well, first of all, we want to thank both of you. This book was wonderful, based by all these about 40 different questions that came in. We know everybody's very, very interested. And I do want to tell you that we know we'll be back up and running not so long from now. So we hope to see you with Long Island Compromise live on the stage.
Book me now.
Absolutely.
I'll pull the shirt out again.
And Zibby, as always, we'd like to thank you. You're absolutely wonderful. And anybody who's listening, we would like to let you know that next week is the third part of this series is Judith Viorst. Her book is nearing 90. It'll be very interesting to hear her perspective as well on women and the choices, and just women keep going and what they do as they go along.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Zibby. Thanks, Marjorie.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.